City of Stevens Point Housing Taskforce meeting, recorded April 27, 2022.
It is 3:15. I will call the Housing Task Force to order. I have taken roll. We do have a quorum. But before we get into the bread and butter of the agenda, we do need to elect a temporary chairperson. So I will go ahead and open the floor for nominations for temporary chair. Recommendation would be Melissa Johnson. Just throwing that out there.
I will nominate Melissa Johnson to chair today's meeting.
Any other nominations?
I'd like to nominate Noah Eschenbach as the chair for today's meeting.
Okay, so we've got two, making this really entertaining.
It's always fun.
Any other nominations? For the second time, any other nominations? And for the third and final time, any other nominations? Okay, seeing none, we have two for chair. I will go ahead and take a voice vote for each individual. All those in favor of Melissa Johnson, please say aye.
Aye.
Those will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Travis or Iduo? I didn't quite hear you folks.
Aye.
Okay, that's 6, which I believe is going to be more than your vote, but I can ask.
No, I'm good.
Okay. That being said, Melissa Johnson, you are now chair, temporary chair.
Temporary chair. Thank you very much. Item 2 on our agenda I'm very interested in this, is presentation and discussion on residential home builder perspective, Origin Family Home Builders, Matt and Jeff Rice. This is exciting.
Oh boy, it's been built up now. Thank you for having us. My name is Jeff Rice. This is Matt Rice. Together we are Origin Home Builders. I reached out actually to Ryan and Melissa because I looked at the members of this body, and saw there was nobody on this committee that is solely a single-family home builder. The closest is Jason Blanker, right? And to say that Jason is a single-family home builder is like saying Jeff Bezos is a paperclip salesman. It's like, well, he does it, but that's not really his bread and butter. No offense to Jason either. I'm actually very glad to see that he's on this body. I think he brings a lot, but it's not quite the same perspective. We just called this presentation Building in Stevens Point from the perspective of a single-family home builder. After 2020, obviously 2020 being the the pandemic and all the tumult in the market. So next slide, full disclosure, Matt and I own Origin Home Builders. We also own 2 other businesses, Keeper Uppers, Home Maintenance Company, and Rain Dog Rental Companies. But what that should tell you is that we build houses, we maintain houses, we rent houses, we sell houses, we buy houses. We do a lot with houses. We really understand houses. So that's what we thought we could bring to this. Origin Home Builders is like I said, 2 owners, 0 employees. So as home builders, we are not the guys swinging a hammer most of the time. We work with a lot of subcontractors, framers, plumbers, electricians. We do mostly general contracting, meaning project management, and then we do odds and ends. So the trim carpentry, sometimes stonework. We know how to do it, but we've done it before, and it's kind of behind us now, and we do a lot of the project management. We use a lot of local subcontractors. That's something that we wanted to point out. It's not like we're bringing people from Illinois or even Madison or Milwaukee here. When we build projects here, the money is staying here, right? And that's important to us. Meaning the profits from our builds are staying right here in our community. And they're not going elsewhere. For a long time, from when our dad started this business back in 2002, it wasn't called Origin the whole time. It used to be DJ Res Development, and we rebranded in like 2015 or 2016. We did a lot of spec houses. We did a lot. Next slide, please. This is a 100% factual photo of Plover, Wisconsin. We did the ranch houses in potato fields, right? Which is what's happening in Plover. We did it for a long time. We built plenty of ranch houses. they're fine. There's nothing wrong with that type of housing. It's just, it's the same after a while. So we decided to kind of move back north to Stevens Point to take on some of the challenges that are inherent in the city, the stuff that you guys I'm sure are talking about, right? A landlocked place with not a lot of available lots, and kind of what do you do with the type of housing that fits in the types of lots here. We also know that Stevens Point, to us, is an important community. We have a lot of family here, as I'm sure many of the people in this room do. We just have ties to the community, and we would like to see the community thrive, and we thought, okay, we have a specific skill set. What can we bring to the table? How can we improve our community through housing? Because just like you guys all know, we saw the need too, right? This is back in 2018. We saw an opportunity to start this development. It's called Fourth Townhomes over on 4th Ave, spelled differently because we think we're clever for some reason. But this is just a sample of the twin homes that are on 4th Ave. On that development, we've got 20 lots. Now, that's kind of splitting hairs a little because these twin homes are all owner-occupied, meaning that a person buys half a building, so the building is sitting on 2 lots, right? So just to make that clear. So really, 20 lots, 10 buildings. And in some cases, we've combined those lots back together to put single-family houses on. So overall, we've got 5 buildings complete. We've got 2 underway, one of which the family's moving in next week. So we'll have 6 complete very soon. 7th to be done this summer, and we'll see how we finish out the rest. 3 parcels still available. Anyway, that's the type of project that we're taking on. This is the kind of thing that we can speak knowledgeably about. Can we go to the next slide, please? Okay. So why is small development good for Stevens Point? It's an opportunity to introduce new alternative housing to the city. It's an opportunity to boost tax revenue with new housing, reinvigorate interest in some of the city's older neighborhoods, in some cases in great locations. The 4th Townhomes is a great example of that. If you're unfamiliar, it's on the site of the old Grant School, which is on 4th Ave to the west of the co-op by like 3 blocks. It's an awesome neighborhood. It's a great location, close to parks, close to downtown, walkable and bikeable, close to the river, right? The problem that we're seeing or have seen is that it's surrounded by decay, for lack of a better word, right? Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself here. And again, keep local dollars in local pockets. If we're doing small scale development, you're bringing in local contractors, you're keeping the profits here. Can we go to the next slide, please? Why is it good for builders to do small scale development in Stevens Point? There's not heavy competition for a variety of reasons. For one, it's hard. I mean, to find that parcel where you can do 10 buildings is super challenging here. The other thing is, this probably is not going to be a surprise, and not to throw anybody on the bus, but the inspectors here are incredibly tough, right? They're tough but fair. And thankfully, we've been able to build a strong enough relationship with them where we're friendly, and they're actually quite helpful. Not all builders in the area have, and they find it really challenging to work with them, so it keeps them out. And they're happy building the 3-bedroom ranches down in Plover, right, and making their money that way. But for the builders that are willing to get along with the inspectors, there's not a ton of competition. To do a development as compared to just a building, it's nice to be able to do a group of something, right? And not a one-off building that sticks out like a sore thumb in the middle of an existing community. If I were to do one of those twin homes, a block either direction on a single lot, it would look abhorrent because it just wouldn't make sense. But when I have a group of those buildings that all fit together, you know, just in the last 2 days, I've had 2 different people say like, wow, that group of buildings looks really nice, as compared to like, man, that building looks really weird, right? Which is what they would say, and what they did say when we just had one building in the middle of that field. They were like, this is absurd. Well, now it starts to feel like something because there's more than one there. And it provides an alternative to single family. Like I said, those are 2 houses mashed together, 0 lot line homes, right? It provides something a little different from just the regular 3-bedroom house on a half-acre lot that you see in many other developments, right? It just is a way to prove we can do something different. Not a ranch house, right? So what are the roadblocks? Why don't we see more builders or small-scale developers trying to take on these kinds of projects? We identified 4 things. Financing, when banks compete, they don't actually compete for this. They find it really hard to get their heads around it. Land, there's not any. Building costs, as you guys I'm sure are well aware, they've gone completely off the charts over the last 2 years, and it would be one thing if they like just rose and stayed and we could make it predictable, but because it's been such a roller coaster ride, it's really hard to predict what things are going to cost from one week to the next, let alone month or year, right? We literally have to send everything up for bid every project because the prices change so dramatically week to week. Whereas bids used to be good for 30 days, they're now good for 7. It's been challenging in that way. Many times people call up and say, how much will it cost to do this? And my answer is just, I don't know. I'm sorry, I can't give you a good answer. And finally, the RFP process. And this is just to highlight, Origin has submitted RFPs to the city 3 times since 2018 on 2 different occasions by invitation by the city to submit RFPs with a 0% success rate.
Can you define RFP?
What's that?
Can you define RFP for somebody that might not know?
Sure, request for proposals. So there might be a certain plot of land or project or something that the city is looking to have redeveloped into something else. So they say, this is open, and it's generally publicly available. But on occasion, whomever's in charge of the RFP will go out and ask a certain individual organization, hey, I think you should apply for this because we would like to see what you would do here. 3 RFPs over 2 occasions, that has happened since 2018. And like I said, none have been accepted, not because of the fault of anybody at the city administration, from what I have heard, but other things involved. Basically, gears not meshing, and it's just like, it seems like the communication is breaking down. So we'll get to that in a little bit. Anyway. So how do we get rid of the roadblocks? Next slide, please. Financing. If it's possible to recruit some lending institutions to get on board with what you guys are on your way to proposing, that's an important step, right? Now, we have a very good relationship with a lender that's helped us out with this development and many, many other projects in the past. This lender is very good, but they are still, just by nature of being a financial institution, very conservative and risk averse. So when we went to them and said, hey, we want to develop, we plan on doing half of that project at once, they went, hey, pump the brakes. We'll give you enough leeway here to do 1 building on spec at a time, which greatly slowed down our ability to move on that project. We very much would have liked to have been done with that project by now, but because of the deliberate pace and then add on pandemic and costs, all that sort of stuff, it's really slowed things down. Whereas if we could have had the get-go or been able to do half at once starting in 2018, 2019, we pretty easily could have been done by now. So can we recruit financial institutions to get on board with whatever plan you guys are doing? And what is it going to take? Our one thought is, does the city need to provide some sort of insurance policy? Another idea is something that maybe Chris, if you can help me out with the gentleman's name. When we had a meeting with a guy from the city of Wapaka, he came up with an idea of like, maybe the city could provide types of housing, examples of housing that they want to see in the city. Well, do you remember that fellow's name?
I don't, but I can get his contact information for everyone on the task force.
Came up with the idea, if we can just show builders, this is what we want, come build it, and then have lenders say, yes, we are willing to fund this sort of building, might be one way to move forward. Next slide, please. The RFP process. If we can get clear guidelines, clear selection process, get the city agencies on the same team, let alone the same page, because that's what it seemed to be, is that not all the city's agencies were on, like, it seemed like there was adversity between them. So when we were invited to come submit for an RFP, there was one link in the chain that was like, no, we're just not doing this. And lastly, from our perspective, whether it's us or any other builder in the area, we would love to see priority given to local contractors, whether it's subcontractors, whether it's general contractors, however, because it is important to us to keep the city's money, our collective tax dollars, right here in the community.
You know, I'll jump in. Part of this, I think, is we're fully aware that the city, you know, is looking at different size and scale of projects at all time, and occasionally, you know, they're probably looking or hoping to do something that's larger than we realistically would want to do or could do. But if we don't know that up front, you know, we might spend the time and effort to go through the process, even if it's just as simple as that, you know, having, you know, a rough idea of, you know, what's the expected kind of cost or tax base of this project, just allows, you know, a builder of our size to pick and choose a little bit more and say, no, that's probably not a good fit for us. We can, you know, we can wait till something else, you know, better or something that's a right fit comes closer.
And again, you're kind of dancing around something that I'd like to take liberty on trying to explain a little bit more. City agencies may not be the best description, because what we have are the city departments. You know, we've got community development, of course, public works and finance and all the others. And then we have these quasi-independent groups, the redevelopment authority, the housing authority, that the council only has budgetary oversight, not necessarily policy oversight. And that misalignment of policy connections is kind of what I believe, based on my understanding of this, is what you're referring to. And council has been fairly clear, and even when I've talked with my former colleague Jeremy Slowinski about this, I wanted to make sure his understanding was kind of the same as mine, because we're typically not always aligned on things. And he goes, no, you're spot on. The council's been very clear on infill development, particularly single-family homes. That somehow we, and I'll say we because that's how you get things done, is we, right? We failed to connect those dots and those policy alignments. And we learned from it. And I'm glad you're bringing it up, because this is really an opportunity for all of us to learn from it and to maybe not only connect the dots, but draw a line and link it a little more strongly. So I appreciate you bringing that up.
Sure, and thanks for that clarification. I absolutely may screw up the vernacular and vocabulary in here, being as I'm not.
How dare you not understand local government?
Yeah, sorry. But yeah, and please at any time if I'm saying something incorrect, just okay, let's go to the next slide. Land, okay. This top bullet is maybe going to rankle some people. I realize we have landlords on the call and in the room in the moment, and I want to clarify the difference that I draw between landlords and slumlords. I am a landlord myself, as we said in the beginning, but we know that there are people that are taking advantage and gaming the system in our community, and it drives us nuts. We see laws on the books and ordinances on the books that are not being enforced, and it's like, please just get it out so that we can collectively, I'm using the royal we here, get these houses that are just condemnable because they're in such awful condition, get them out of the housing stock. I don't know what it takes, right? And once again, I realize I'm speaking from an uneducated point of view, but as an example, when we walked through two houses that were up for auction last year over on the north side, one was on 4th Ave and one was on Union, and just the state of decay that these houses are in. And knowing that this is just two examples out of, I'm sure, dozens in the area, and to go through them and see like just not only that they were in bad shape, but like evidence of kids. It's like, gross, guys. We need enforcement to happen on these ordinances. We need something to happen with this housing stock so that it's not allowed to get to that state. The stuff that's on its way, make sure it's stopped before it gets there. And the stuff that's already there, get it off the books so that people like Matt and I can come in and put something more decent there. One of the reasons that you're not seeing other builders come in to some of the empty lots that are available is because it's houses like those that are next door, right? And when housing is as expensive to build as it is right now, who's gonna wanna come in and pay $350,000, $400,000 for a brand new house when it's sitting next to quite literally a pile of garbage next door? Okay. Get the RA to redevelop something. I mean, that's once again a poke at the RA here. Because from our perspective, we haven't seen much happen in the single family space. Obviously, there's some massive apartment projects going on. And that's cool to see, different types of housing. But we would love to see the RA get involved with pushing forward some sort of plan, which I'm sure is what you guys are working on in the single family space. And the third bullet is kind of just a takeoff on the first one. Demo your tax delinquent properties. Get the garbage off the rolls here, guys. Okay. Next slide, please. And building costs. Okay, this is something that's really important. And once again, this is probably wrinkle the other half of the room. Except that affordable new housing is a myth. Okay. A new single-family house costs us, not the homeowner, costs us probably about $300,000 to build. And that is the most affordable house we can build right now. Okay, this is not like some high-end granite walls, granite floors, everything, right? Then you have to add profit on top of it, okay? Even an apartment unit costs probably $150,000+ to build, and there are reasons, because an apartment is commercial, classified commercial instead of residential, that would factor into that. To create affordable housing means it's heavily subsidized to prioritize low-income people, right? And we see that in some of the apartment complexes that are coming up, right? There's a spot for that, right? But it can't be everything, right? So what's the answer to building single family? How do we spur this, right? What does affordable housing mean for single family housing in our area, right? Well, this is one answer. You can go ahead to the next slide, please.
I have one question,
Yes.
if you don't mind.
Yes.
The $300,000, does that include sewer and water and utilities?
Yeah.
So
Yep.
if that was somehow managed in a different way, so sort of a policy that this would be supported or underwritten by the city, that would bring down the costs, what do you think the average of that is?
Five,
For sewer and water?
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
5,000
That's
maybe.
Significant.
okay, so
Yeah,
it's not
it's-
a whole lot,
No,
but
I mean,
it's something.
Yeah, a couple percent.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
And how many square feet would that be?
Well, one example is the house that we're building on the north side right now. I mean, it's, how many square feet on the main floor?
Which-
The bungalow.
It's an approximately 1,300 square foot footprint. Total finished square feet is probably around 2,300 square feet. And yeah, I mean, that house does have some nicer amenities. But yeah, realistically, that house, you know, including the cost of the lot, it will be, you know, significantly over $300,000. So this is not a large home, you know, this is not a 2,000 square foot footprint, 3-car garage home. You know, this is a pretty modest sized home that fits in, you know, early 20th century neighborhood.
So it's costing you about $230 a square foot to build a house right now?
Something like that. Again, that house specifically, I mean, the fourth development specifically has some higher end finishes, so we do have slightly higher costs than, again, maybe like, you know, I mentioned to Ryan recently some costs that were presented at a meeting, and Habitat for Humanity obviously is building to a slightly different level, and obviously is getting donation in materials and labor so they can keep costs lower. But yeah, if we're going to build to what we see as expectations for kind of local new housing, then yeah.
And that's even on the low end. I mean, everything I've seen this year, you're close, 250 to 300 is pretty standard across
Yeah.
the board. So you know, from an estimate standpoint on what we see, you know, that's probably pretty realistic.
Yeah.
Thanks for the backup on that.
Yeah.
Any other questions on that? Okay, so the answer that we see is, the metaphor that I'm using is hermit crabbing. I don't know if you've ever seen this. When a hermit crab wants to move up to a bigger shell, they all line up and all the littler ones like move up one shell. This is what we see as the answer, right? Because new or single family affordable housing is not new housing, right? The way to do it that we see is build a nice house, build a high-end house, build the house that the richest person that's living in Stevens Point proper right now gets jealous of and wants to move into. So that second richest person can move up into that house and up and up and up and up, right? And create that upward mobility that way, right? Because we don't see a lack of low-level housing in the area. There's a lot of low-level housing in the area. What we see is people who are living in houses below their means a lot, mostly because there's not that next level up, that newer level up that they could move into or might want to move into if it was available, right? So, is this making sense? Like, basically ratchet up. Then, when you get to the littlest crab down there, moving into that next tier house, well, they've left behind that shell that's no good to anyone anymore. Tear it down, start new, build the next biggest shell again, right? And then it just self-perpetuating cycle. Easier said than done, obviously, but this is one way that we see it happening. Let's go to the next slide, please. So, what does that mean? It means get a little exclusive, right? We're building those bigger houses for a specific demographic, right? The nicer houses. So, how do you get exclusive? Well, maybe you have like some city-only or neighborhood-only events available, right? These are reasons that a person might want to move into that neighborhood or that house, because right now we don't see the barriers to entry. Stevens Point likes to think that it's the epitome of culture in the area. In a lot of ways it is, right? But it neglects to accept the fact that you can get to Stevens Point from, I don't know, Hull, Plover, Carson, Custer, Amherst in 15, 20 minutes. There are very few barriers to anyone in taking advantage of the culture that Stevens Point provides just because they live so close, right? If you provide a reason for somebody to live in nice housing in Stevens Point, they would move there. But right now, what's the reason? To live next to the type of housing that we've already talked about. To live next to Matt Rice. That's some other options or ideas, and once again, you guys probably know more about this sort of stuff, but we see a lot of elderly people housed in low-level housing, stuff that maybe they shouldn't be living in. I would like to see them stop living in, and this is speaking from direct examples of what we see every day around our development. Is there a way to get these old elders to stop aging in place and maybe start aging together, right? I'm talking about older roommates, right? People that can like help each other out, even if it's not a romantic relationship. They can have a friendly relationship, thereby not only helping them socially, but also freeing up some housing stock for redevelopment or demolition or update or whatever. The third thing I put on here is actively promoting change as positive, and that's a challenging thing because I know there are plenty of people in the community that love Stevens Point exactly as it is and want it to stay exactly as it is forever and ever and ever because it is perfect in every way in their minds. I don't accept that. Change is inevitable, and if we want the city to remain in its current state, that means that we all have to pay more for it as it goes along. Taxes are going to continue to rise. Without having redevelopment that draws taxes to those larger, nicer, newer houses, we have to continue to pay more for the existing stock, which is going to continue to decay and get worse. So we're paying more for something that's not as good. I don't like that option. So get through to the community, and this is largely just a matter of communication. We need to change and develop in a positive way so that we all can enjoy a community that grows and thrives, just works well for a variety of different people, right? Okay, last slide. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Here's our contact info. There's a picture of us in case you forget what we look like. And you can feel free to contact us if you have any questions, all right?
Yeah, and by all means, if you have immediate questions,
Yeah.
while we're here, again, this is kind of our perspective. We're two local builders. We're not housing data scientists. We don't work in the arenas that some of you all do. But yeah, this is kind of what we see either from our day-to-day or living in the community. We're here a lot, and like Jeff mentioned, I mean, all of our businesses are kind of intertwined with housing. So I mean, we hope that we have maybe a unique perspective, but we also know that we're not what we bring to the table is not the end-all, be-all of perspective and decision-making. So, yeah, happy to entertain some questions or just discuss anything.
I always have questions, so. First, I want to thank you for using the term elders versus seniors, because elders denotes respect. And after serving for 6 years on the ADRC Board, Commission on Aging, I have learned that when we use elders, we're not talking about old people, we're talking about respecting the older generation in a way that elders, it just is a better word, so thank you for using that. In the idea of that, you're really talking about cooperative living opportunities, so it could be 2, 3, 4 people. If someone has a 4-bedroom home and they want to age in that home but need roommates, we would need to change up the way we define what a family could be living in those situations. Is that kind of what I'm
Yeah,
hearing
certainly.
in that? Is that the thread through that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't mean to define like how people would have to live, but yeah, I understand that there are ordinances in place, or once again, my terminology may not be correct. But things that prohibit multiple adults from living together. Yeah, I think easing those types of restrictions would go a long way.
I was just going to say one last thing. The idea of elders kind of hits to your next point is positive change. Because growing old is not negative. It's actually a positive. Because if you're not growing old, that means you're dead. And that's a bad thing. So there's a strong tie in there, and I really appreciate how it was presented, so thank you.
Okay. Any other questions?
Have you seen any limitations from lot size restrictions in the city? Has that held you back? I know when you're doing your proposal, it's probably a little bit different than going in and taking an existing site, but I think late 70s, a lot of the lot sizes were changed and the zoning requirements were changed. Does that adversely affect what you guys do?
It hasn't, but that's because we, what's the phrase for it here? We have a planned unit development on for that project.
Yep.
So that's been our primary project for the last couple of years. And we did request really small setbacks on there, so we get away with it. If we were to try to build one of those homes on any other lot in the city, yeah, it would just be a no-go. We wouldn't be able to do it.
That's, I'm wondering if it had written down some other thoughts as you guys went through stuff, but if, you're talking about the city, just for your request for proposal, some of those having kind of an idea, the city may alternatively say, hey, we've got a blueprint or a footprint of a house already with approved setbacks that any builder can come in without getting variances or approvals and say, hey, I know I can come in and build this house. We have a blueprint for it, any builder can use it. The city pre-approving a couple different footprints might be a good alternative. It might save a little bit of cost, but it could also be a step the city could take to encourage some development in some of those. Even going as far as saying, hey, if you have a rundown house with an empty lot next to it, we'll find a way to fit a 4-unit on there, or a 2-unit, or something where you address maybe finding a site that those elders could then move to. And circumventing, because I know on our end, if we have a duplex and it burns down the lot size requirements, I can't put a duplex back
Right.
there. So addressing some of those concerns with some pre-approved plans on the city's end for single-family and multifamily might not be a bad way to go to address some of that, and I don't know how much it'll really impact affordability, but it would, and again, affordability is all relative. I think we, as a group, have focused affordability a lot on the very low end of the spectrum in our community, but I do think there are multiple levels of affordability, especially with where minimum wages have gone, that a $300,000 house is affordable for 2 people making minimum wage, or not minimum wage, but you can go out, Verizon's $20 an hour, even if somebody making $15 an hour, if you look at what that can afford using 32% or whatever we want to use, metric we use for someone's income, that affordability is all relative. So having some different options out there, again, I think a lot of what we've done so far is focused on more rentals than it has single-family ownership, and having some options out there for that might work. A couple other notes I made, I know the city's working on some plans for grants for, or if that's out already, the grant for converting student rentals, essentially. Something like that for some rundown single-family homes might not be bad, because the tough part on our end is those homes say I own a home that needs a lot of work, but it's still worth, in this market, it's still worth $100,000. I can't justify taking the loss and bulldozing it and then building something, but maybe the city works with some grant program or something to come in and redevelop those homes for single family. And it, not even something for someone to purchase it, but maybe something that an owner can apply for a grant and remodel that home and then sell it, and at least get out from underneath it, because I think there's probably, and even I know it ruffles my feathers with slumlords, but a lot of those homes in those neighborhoods are single-family homes that are run down. And I think people drive past them and assume they're a rental when they're not. And I think, a program to work with either existing owners or new owners, and not just limited to new owners like the other program is, but a grant program for people to come in and purchase those properties, or existing owners to apply for a grant to remodel them to then sell them. They can't remodel it and stay there, but, program to convert some of those. And again, the lot sizes and the unrelated zoning were the other two that I think adversely impact in these neighborhoods what new trends are looking at. And I know there's a big push not to have any more multifamily in there, but if we look at density, taking an older and you even get a lot of those where you had the mother-in-law suite in the 1950s that now it's non-conforming and you can't, it's been empty.
Right.
If you're looking at trying to increase density and increase, affordability, that's a good avenue to pursue. I know it's been taboo for years to give an inch on anything multifamily related, but I do think in those neighborhoods, that's going to be a big piece in the years to come. So just a couple thoughts I had as I took notes.
I'll comment just a little bit on, lot size and footprint. I think for a lot of local builders who, likely haven't been doing infill, in Stevens Point, where you are getting a lot smaller lot sizes, especially in historic neighborhoods, a lot of them, they might just be unfamiliar in a certain amount of, uncomfortability because of being unfamiliar. So I do think having, the city almost from a prescriptive standpoint say, here are some options, and even, it may seem like a small barrier, but I do think that opens it up to some other local builders who, typically are thinking in their heads, well, there's no way I can get a 3-bedroom, 2-car garage building on this, because they're just so used to 150-foot wide lots. So I think that helps from the builder's standpoint, and ultimately I think critical mass is important. Like, people need to be, the consumer needs to see new variations of smaller homes, and they need to be able to see a good example of like, oh, what could this look like, and what could it be, and how can it feel, and how can we bring modern amenities into a smaller package. So even if we can get designs out to people, I think that is helpful, and yeah, maybe a couple small pieces of the puzzle, but I do think they could be significant.
I got something. So, yeah, I agree with the RFP process. Jeff, you and I worked together before on something like that with Skyward, and a simple RFI or even a pre-bid walkthrough could probably alleviate some of those mess ups with the city has RFPs. It probably does. Two, you touched on the shell game, which is a lot of fun there. Have you guys found, any way to move the big shell then? I mean, within the city of Stevens Point, it's landlocked, there's only so much available, so how do you get the big crab to move and open up space for the little ones?
Well, I think the answer is yes. We have seen it. On our development on 4th Ave. So in a community that is surrounded by 100-year-old houses, the 2 houses on the northeast corner are people who lived in the Falcons Cove subdivision north of Century 2 or 3 years ago. They were attracted to the location. They were attracted to a smaller lot size. They were sick of cutting grass. They, no joke. They wanted easy access to the river. They wanted a place where it was close enough for them to allow their kids to walk to school. These are the types of amenities that you don't get in Hull and Custer and whatever. The only things they had to know about it, and these are very specific people, right? They're eco-conscious, they're energy conscious, so they were like, we don't need this. The house they were in was 5,000 square feet footprint. So they're like, they moved down to about a 2,000 square foot footprint. It was a dramatic downsize for them. They had to be able to have that vision, and it took a little bit of talking. But Can it be done? Absolutely. Matter of communication.
You guys seem to be a little bit more alternative on some of the housing, which is, I think is pretty cool. How about going a step further with that, and maybe everybody shares the energy utilities and footprint of like a condo or something like that? Is that something you think it could be relevant around here too, from your perspective at least?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's something that Bill Yedich attempted, right, over in the Moses Creek area. I think ultimately it didn't happen, but he was talking about putting in a community geothermal loop in that development. From what I've heard from the people living there, that it just hasn't materialized. But yeah, that sort of thing. I mean, I know the people that have bought lots in that area, that's one of the reasons they bought it. They're like, oh, this is a cool renewable energy thing. But that, I also don't think it has to happen on the community level, although I certainly think it could. 3 of the single-family homes, in fact, all the single-family homes that were under contract in our development over there have opted to put solar panels on.
Okay.
So it's, yeah, I mean, if the option is presented, that's something they absolutely would choose.
Yeah, and specifically talking about condos, I mean, we don't have a lot of examples in town. I think there may have been a handful off of HH over the years. And I mean, condo living probably is mostly just unfamiliar with, you know, people who are, you know, local to Stevens Point, because we haven't seen them. But I think they do offer kind of an interesting mix of, you know, home ownership in terms of, you know, being able to make an investment and potentially, you know, get a return on investment in the future, but with a lower maintenance and, you know, kind of a little easier living from that standpoint. So it's hard to say. And I think that could be a key when we talk about, you know, how do we make higher end housing that fits in Stevens Point. You know, a condo might be something more appropriate, or some higher end apartment, you know, style buildings, because we are limited on space, we are limited on footprint. I think, you know, from what we, or at least I perceive, you know, people in our community, once they reach a certain kind of income level and they can afford to, they often look for a bigger house and a bigger property.
They kind of leave Stevens Point.
Yeah, well, they're kind of forced to, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, it's unlikely that, and again, I know the council is, you know, pretty strongly advocated against, you know, additional kind of sprawl where, you know, where we theoretically could do bigger lot sizes that would be attractive to kind of that group of people. So we do have to think for, you know, or look at other solutions. You know, how can we provide interesting, you know, high-end housing to people who could afford that, and still have it be desirable. Yeah, it's different. It's different than, you know, a really nice 4-bedroom, 3,000 square foot, 3-car garage house in the periphery. So that'll take a lot of creativity, I think, on the part of, you know, people within the city, you know, people in our space as well. But mostly I think it's just unknown because we haven't seen it. So we need to have some examples to test a little bit, so.
Ryan, you might be able to answer this. Has the city seen any proposals for like 3-story homes in any of those neighborhoods? I know some of the existing homes on Strongs and Church have some 3rd stories, but I spent a decent amount of time in Chicago, and I mean, it's all 3- and 4-story homes. And if we're looking at infill, are there any limitations to that in the current zoning? Or is it just something that no one's pursued?
Yeah, we have height restrictions, but they're pretty generous. I mean, 35 feet is, and that doesn't include like gabled ends.
Okay.
I mean, you could have a 3-story home in the city realistically.
That's like 2 stories for Noah.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of new home construction, we haven't seen something like that.
I just wasn't sure if there were any barriers to that already.
I
I'd
can
say
see that.
4-story for me. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just saying.
Yeah, and then if you hit a certain square footage, and I don't recall what it is exactly, it's actually considered commercial, and then you have to have an architect's stamp and all sorts of different stuff. It becomes really challenging.
In our original proposal for the 4th townhome development, they were 3-story, and we were made aware that if we have a 3rd story, we would have to put fire suppression systems in. So that was the major restriction. I mean, that was a substantial additional cost to put sprinklers and fire escapes on, and then the fire escapes then counted toward, you know, the setback. So it was challenge that we decided was not worth taking on.
Okay, so there are some barriers.
Yep, okay.
And one last is what I'm also hearing, because I'm thinking, in my mind, I'm always thinking policy. Anybody who knows me because you don't fix problems by spot doing them. You have to have a consistent policy. So I'm kind of hearing as part of the shell moving, which I love the analogy, is, how council thinks about, I don't want to say sprawl, but appropriate growth. That plays into the equation of hopping from the shells. Is that an accurate statement?
Why do you speak to that?
Yeah, I think certainly. And I guess to take it a step further, we were just talking before this meeting, it's not just Stevens Point's plans for housing, but we have to look at a slightly larger, more regional perspective. We have to be aware that there will inevitably be people who, once they, accumulate enough wealth, will want a bigger house and a bigger property. And if Stevens Point can't provide that, we have to make sure that our neighbors are, so that at least we can free up the housing in our neighborhood and we can still get that, upward mobility kind of throughout the process. So, if there are opportunities to do, other types of projects within the city where we can offer slightly larger lots and maybe slightly larger homes. I know the Gullah Road proposal from several months ago, I think, checked a lot of boxes for a lot of people. Wasn't all the way outside of town. So stuff like that, I think, could certainly play, a significant role, especially as we talk about, how do we add some stuff into that kind of mid-upper or, high upper level so that we can free up some other housing stock within the city.
Thank you. If there's no other questions and no objections, I would hand back the chair to the chair.
Yes, sorry.
I have one quick comment.
ahead.
I just want to thank you for being bold and proposing a solution to the landlocked issue. Ryan and Adam and maybe our fellow property managers who are here can chime in on this too. Is there currently a housing inspection program that the city or the county operates?
It's voluntary, isn't it?
Yeah, the state used to allow us to do mandatory inspections. That changed in 2017, 16,
Yeah.
and now it's voluntary. And we have very little volunteers.
Gotcha.
In order to mandate inspections, we would have to inspect every single parcel in the city to meet what the new law says,
Okay.
which would be a big task.
Yeah, I've seen other communities in Wisconsin take swings at it, and I think they've started to do it fairly well. And it's definitely been something that is a experiment and fix as you go along program.
One of the things that we haven't done particularly, but others have, is where someone comes in for a permit and you require some type of inspection, or if they're back taxed or owe any money, the city don't issue a permit, but that doesn't really resolve the issue. If somebody's coming in for a roof replacement and you say, well, you actually owe $4,000 in back property taxes, we're not going to issue this permit, you're not doing any good, and you're kind of starting to spiral downward in some of these neighborhoods that we try to avoid. And it's just, it's a really fine balance at times of being practical and but wanting to enforce and ensure that you've got a quality housing stock.
Sure. Some of the programs that I've seen start with exterior inspections, and if those properties are deemed unfit or unsafe, they will lead to an interior inspection and further support or consequence for the property owner who.
Yeah, we and for better or for worse, when you're in the inspections division, you see some really terrible situations. And yeah, I've been in homes that we've had to go through the hoarding condemning process, and there's people and pets and children, and it's an awful situation. One of the things that, and I was just losing my train of thought thinking about some of these terrible, I don't say PTSD, but there's been some really uncomfortable situations. But where we've had some success is seeking inspection warrants And that it's just like you would for like a search warrant. You go to a judge and you ask for an inspection warrant. In some cases, we've leveraged that in the past, but it comes down to somebody just doesn't want to let us into their property to inspect whatever possible issues you might have.
Well, I know we've broached that topic before when we were on the, coming into that inspection program, that it places a very large undue burden on the quality property owners. The amount of time it would take me to take the inspection department through 130 units is burdensome. I mean, I just don't have the time to do it. I wouldn't be able to facilitate it. Maybe we need to focus on finding, existing stuff that's on the books or other ways to target the trouble, either landlords or single family, because I think it's also often focused on landlords, and it's not necessarily the case. I mean, I would argue that on the north side especially, I mean, a majority of the homes that are in rougher shape are probably single family homes, and finding some teeth within the existing code to work with that is, and given where the state law's at now, working around that, to more of a spot treatment than a carte blanche, we're just gonna throw this out on everybody, is maybe the way to go.
Yeah, I'm maybe not recommend, maybe I'm not speaking clearly. I'm not trying to recommend like a blanket, every house gets inspected or every unit in the community would be inspected, but it is one of those spot treatments that there's an issue that's noticed within the community, has been flagged by community members, not necessarily volunteers, but there is an entity that locates those properties and flags them for inspection. And it's not necessarily every house, like every property owner needs to submit for an inspection.
So one thing we are likely to do this summer is essentially neighborhood inspections. And what we do now is you get in a vehicle, you go out, you follow up on complaints if somebody calls or if you see a complaint when you're out in the field. But the idea that we're pushing for this summer through neighborhood improvement is to physically walk some of our neighborhoods and then essentially provide notice to either owners or landlords that, hey, you've got issues with the exterior of this property, and then we start essentially the time, right? So you've got 1 year from the date of notice to repair the roof or repair the siding. And that's one thing that some of these other larger municipalities have started to do, and it's actually been pretty successful. So we're trying to replicate that in Stevens Point. And it goes back to, I think a lot of the neighborhoods, there's a property I'm thinking of in particular, and I'm not going to disclose the location, but it's right on one of our main arterial streets into the city, and we drive by it all the time, but you never really notice it. And what ended up happening was a neighbor finally, I don't want to say got fed up, but was really concerned about the state of the home and called it in, and actually we had it essentially received an inspection warrant to go in, and we found out that it was an older gentleman, his son, who had some IDD problems that they were working through, and there was no hot water, there was no working bathroom, the home was in really awful shape, and that's when we started to pursue putting them into the city's housing authority, housing stock, and it's been almost 2 years since we put them on the waiting list. Sure. And essentially we've told this gentleman that once you are moved out, we will be raising the structure. But a lot of times, unless you get neighbors who are willing to step up and say, I'm worried about the condition of this property, we have 9,000 some parcels in the city, it's hard to inspect them on a regular basis.
Yeah. I'd be happy to maybe talk more about this outside of the meeting, about some public health programs that exist out there that help acquire some resources to inspect.
Swaying a bit from the agenda.
I was referring to part of the presentation.
Yeah.
I was going to bring it back to the affordable housing side. There is, and I know Travis has talked about it before, may not be the best way to phrase it, but there's a fine line between having a safe, functional home and keeping it affordable. If we get into these homes and an owner or a landlord or somebody is going to have to put 20, 30,000 in, or they just sell the property and whoever buys it remodels it, we're now taking stock away from what would be considered an affordable housing. So I think anytime we look at any of those types of programs, it's also important to keep a focus on, a safe house doesn't mean a new kitchen, it doesn't mean a new bath, that, I think there are times where, but it's tough with some of those older homes, because the second you touch one thing, now you need to bring everything else up to code. So there's a very fine line to walk there between trying to maintain a level of affordability on some of these homes and say, yep, it's not perfect, it may not be what my house looks like, but it is a safe, warm place for somebody to live at an affordable rate. And especially as we've seen home values, and now I think rents are slowly following suit, that will probably become more of a discussion.
Along with social service programs, so. Madam Chair?
Yes,
Yes.
thanks.
Good.
I apologize for being late. I was giving someone a ride home from work. Yeah, good. I want to appreciate that you brought up your kind of brutal process with your proposals, and I know that can be a point of frustration, and I was just racking to remember if in our newly approved strategic vision we had called out supporting local contractors, but my perspective is very similar to yours in that the more we can support local builders. I feel like during my time on the council, I've experienced some proposals where almost the more people seem to think that they know about a local proposer, that it's almost to the detriment rather than the unknown or kind of, of someone who's outside the community. But I think that the relationships that you have to this community, whether it's through the subcontractors and the material sourcers, the fact that you probably know people who can move into units that you're constructing is really, should be seen as a positive and a value. And so that maybe is something we can incorporate as into our vision here, as well as actually supporting the circular local economy.
Here, here.
Does anyone else have anything further? Thank you for coming in.
Thanks for your time. Thanks for listening. Thanks very much.
The next part of our discussion, we did talk about goal 1 last time, but we have it on here to revisit of diversifying and expanding the city's housing stock for all residents and breaking down the zoning, economic development, financial assistance, and community engagement side of it.
Yes. Okay, so let me share the screen here. And I will state, we probably won't get to goal number 2 today, and that's totally fine. And in fact, when your staff started to work on it, it became really clear that there's a lot more to it than we were ready to present. So I think it's fair to just a little teaser. But we'll just start. So as you recall, goal number 1 that this group has identified is to diversify and expand the city's housing stock for all residents. And again, that means all residents, whether you're renters, homeowners, the IDD community, homeless, those who are ALIS-based or ALIS eligible. So I really kind of got into each conversation that we had last month and broke it down into realization, recommendation, and ideas. And we spent a lot of time last month talking about the definition of family, and I think that conversation is so broad and so advanced that should really be a separate topic for next month, where we really get into, what are the few recommendations that this body could make to the Plan Commission and the Council for that change. But the realization is that no more than 2 unrelated individuals just doesn't work functionally anymore. And it's becoming more of a detriment than it is, more of a detriment in our neighborhoods than something that's beneficial for the community as a whole. Kudos to Adam. He's done a really nice job putting a lot of this information together and gathering definitions of families from other municipalities. And so we're hopeful we'll have a more serious conversation on this next month after we talk about the second goal as well, maybe before, so however we structure that meeting. Another thing that we talked quite a bit about was small home or tiny home cluster style development. We just heard it, single family detached housing still reigns supreme in new home construction, but is there a way to allow single family dwelling housing while encouraging higher density and communal style living? And so the recommendation that I think this body could make is, although we do use plan unit development or plan development zoning, specific zoning code to allow through the permitted use cottage court or smaller home cluster development should be adopted. This will allow higher density single-family unit development and communal style living. And then for idea, I did put down missingmiddlehousing.com is a great nonprofit organization that actually provides like real life examples to planners and land use professionals on what a possible zoning code change could look like. And for those who don't necessarily understand what we're trying to get at, here's some really good examples. This is 110 by 150 feet. Most lots in the core of the city are between 50 and 60, 65 feet, and between 125 and 150 feet deep. So you could have essentially 6 single-family homes on what would traditionally be a 2 single-family home lot in the city. So you achieve higher density, you achieve that more communal-esque living, but you still have the independent single-family detached structures on that property as well. And this is just an example of bungalow-style cottage home.
Yeah, me too. When I first learned about this kind of, I thought, I want to go there. Yep.
So before we hop over to the next one, any questions, comments, concerns, issues with this recommendation and idea?
I will say stuff like that. I know Origin talked about a little bit. It's something we see. The lack of inventory is a huge thing in our market right now. There are a ton of people that want to move up or down that can't because there's no inventory, and getting from A to B is almost impossible. So having developments like that where you may get elders that are downsizing.
Ooh, you did good, thank you.
Corrected it. I don't want to get tackled on the way out. Having housing like that's available where we can create space where there isn't space now, I think would help to free up, and it will take time, but I mean, the more developments like that we can get, or build ready, plans, maybe something like that the city has, I think you'll facilitate those people, especially downsizing. You have a lot of, my parents' generation who are going to stay in their homes because their larger home is cheaper than a smaller, newer home right now. So until either that existing home goes up in value enough or new construction comes down, which I don't think will happen, those people aren't going to move. They're not going to free up homes. And truthfully, I think our market right now is just a huge traffic jam where it's just going to take years to kind of free up. And any developments like that, anything we can do to create more affordable, smaller spaces for people to move into will help alleviate a lot of that demand.
The nice thing about that too is that's also protected in equal housing too, and it's something that I've seen personally where people of that generation do want to, they want to come together. They have smaller needs, smaller space needs, and they are more social than they probably were during the full house years. And so that kind of living could probably that kind of housing could be a good solution that way.
You could also tailor, I know we've had some people that need assisted living, a couple of presentations we had focused on that, where you could have, some of those pods, the city could say, hey, we'll allow that, but we want 2 of those homes to facilitate somebody with a disability. Something like that would really pair well with everything we've discussed, and or having a portion of it subsidized, or it's easier said than done probably.
And maybe you can share ADA compliance too. I don't know.
Yeah.
The other part about that is that these can be in existing neighborhoods where you've got young and older folks living all together, which, the worst thing I can possibly think of is elders, I almost said it, is like, oh, that's scary. I want my neighbors, I love the sound of children screaming in their backyards. There's nothing better. And so I think that's what's attractive about that kind of thing.
Get off my lawn.
Yep.
Places like that going on,
Yeah.
it's not all great, in particular if it's in the neighborhood.
Well, I know walkability was a big thing with a couple of the presentations we've had too.
Yep. Okay.
Cool. Actually, a quick update. Grove Convent redevelopment project broke ground yesterday. And the accessory dwelling unit ordinance has been approved. So.
You brought that up like you just typed that, put that slide in there.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, right. I was like, man, I should update everybody on kind of what's going on here.
And the ADU includes also accessory commercial units.
yeah.
So it's the blend, which I think really creates opportunity, so.
And you didn't get 20 applications from landlords to build ADUs? right away?
Honestly, I thought about putting ropes out, to corral the influx of folks that were expected Tuesday morning. So So the second, sorry, cool. This is like 2 years in the making, and it's just been a real cluster.
It's done. It's
Yeah.
done.
The conversation that we had were, how do we explore ways to increase missing middle housing through zoning changes? And the realization is that the missing middle housing that historically has been well utilized throughout the United States went by way of the wind post-war in the housing boom. And this desire to have, Euclidean zoning and single family on single family lots. And so I think this is really what we're seeing as a result of decades of neglect and not allowing missing middle housing is within the city of Stevens Point as well, to have limited availability for diverse housing needs within our existing community. And often missing middle housing becomes part of the fabric of neighborhoods in which they reside, mainly because their footprints and scale are not too dissimilar to the surrounding homes. And I threw this bad boy up here. Anyone know how many units are in this building?
No.
12?
11 units, and you would never know it.
Is it for
Just
sale
looking.
or has been for sale?
I think it was.
recently?
It is.
It was for sale. They had 3 offers sight unseen and didn't allow anyone to show it. I tried getting in there multiple times with different
Okay.
buyers, and not to get too off topic, I don't think the broker did the owner any great work
That's unfortunate.
by selling it so quickly.
Yeah.
But it's hard to say.
Apartments.
Yeah. Another good example, there's a fourplex on Brawley Street. There's 2 fourplexes on Brawley that fit in with the fabric of the neighborhood and don't detrimentally impact the surrounding uses as well. So recommendation would be, again, although we could use planned unit development, which is really, can I just state, planned unit development is like the cop-out of, we have a zoning code that doesn't work, but we want this project, so we're gonna find a zoning way to make this whole project work. But provide specific zoning code changes to allow through permitted use the construction of missing middle housing. My recommendation would be up to 6 units with reduced street setbacks and parking minimums that could address the desire to diversify our housing stock. And then again, I linked the missing middle housing. Honestly, if you have time and want to get really stoked about missing middle housing, that's like the website to go to.
I can second that, but can I ask about why limiting to 6? If we just saw a pretty decent building with 11 units in it?
Yeah, just a tossed out. I mean, you could change that, and it could be 8, it could be 10, 12, whatever you want.
Is it square footage that triggers this fire suppression?
Anything more than 3 units is considered commercial and would require fire suppression. And that's where you start running into some of the other challenges.
So you have to kind of scale.
Well, and
to-
especially when you get into commercial, if you get large enough, cubic footage comes into play, and then there's a whole lot to do with air handling, there's a whole bunch of other stuff that comes into play.
Stormwater runoff, waste management,
Which,
parking.
off topic, is a big issue downtown. When you look at redeveloping some of those buildings downtown, the cubic footage of some of them really steps you up into a class where it's just not affordable to step in and do anything.
Was it 50,000 cubic foot or something like
Yeah,
that?
50 or 60, I
Yeah,
think.
something like that,
So, but this is something too, we could,
I will say they'll
Remember.
probably, and they complained a little bit about the inspection department. I will say on our end, things have gotten a lot better in the last 5 or 6 years from the inspection department. Also from the council, I feel like on our end, we'd had, a lot more headbutting going on in years past, and I think a lot of us have kind of moved past that, and it's been working much better. So thank you to everybody. I do think you may get a little pushback if you go too large of a development, both, as you've seen with the ADUs, from a community scale, but also on the council a little bit perhaps. If you get too many units in an area, sometimes a small bite is a good step in the right direction.
It's nice to hear good feedback.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Change is positive.
Yes,
Change
change is
positive.
positive, action, yes.
and since we're still on zoning, and I know that the missing middle and the cottage court play into this as well, but providing reduced setbacks, consider the surrounding built environment, and reduce parking requirements for residential development to better fit within established neighborhoods. Form-based zoning is like the way to go, and really should be the driving factor as we rewrite the 1979 zoning code. And then identifying ways to address our over parking requirements that exist. I've said this publicly a number of times. parking lots don't do anything for the city. I mean, they're not tax revenue for the city. We're better off finding more units for higher property tax, and I hate to say it that way, but you know, my job is to help make sure that we maintain the services we have. And so by reducing the amount of parking or capping the amount of parking that you can have, and then leveraging like overnight on-street parking as ways to address some of this, is one way to make sure that you're getting more value out of every acre that you have. Because, as it was said earlier, we're not making more land. And so land uses that aren't parking focused tend to be better for the long-term sustainability of a community. Form-basedcodes.org is a great resource in identifying this.
Say it again.
Form-basedcodes.org, and I'll send this PowerPoint out as
Oh, okay.
well.
So to be clear, we are talking about maybe making a recommendation of relaxing some of the overnight parking to assist with some of the overparking and,
It already is.
I know I'm saying the Baltimore thing here, but,
Yeah, no, we-
council approved that already.
oh, okay.
Yeah, about a year ago, so.
Thank you for Ryan, to Director Kanowski, for advocating for that.
Exactly.
It is also, I would note, it's important to not forget about parking though. I think as much as you take some of those developments, and we've talked before about it, but parking is still an important thing, and as much as at times it's, you know, some of these developments don't have the parking, and they say, oh, it won't be an issue, it often spills over. And I know the overnight parking addresses that in a large manner, but it's also not something to completely throw to the side.
And Noah, my understanding is the apartment association has done evaluation of what interests the students.
Yeah,
And parking is fairly high.
Mike has headed that up recently.
Yeah.
We've worked with the, I don't know if it's CPS, somebody within the university
Mm-hmm.
to do some independent studies 2 years in a row, or every other year, something like that. So we're working on getting some historical data so we can go back and look at trends,
Right.
but also have some data. It's all done independently through the university, and I think parking was second on list of concerns among students.
That's my understanding.
Second to location.
And I think it's worthwhile to like really have a separate conversation about what form-based zoning is, but you know, in a nutshell, it's essentially looking at the historic development patterns of a neighborhood and saying, okay, how do we get back to something like that? Arguably, our traditional neighborhood overlay zoning district is a style of form-based zoning. So, you know, that's something that we can talk about at another meeting, but this would be a recommendation as we move forward. And honestly, as the community development guy here, I think as we rewrite our zoning code, the form-based zoning code makes the most sense as opposed to our current code, which is hodgepodge Euclidean zoning.
I think what was brought up about certain like templates for homes that Matt and Jeff had brought up earlier too could pair well with form-based zoning codes moving forward too.
And I think you'll see, we've talked a little bit about it also, Ryan, but I think you'll see a lot with home costs going where they're going. I think you'll see a lot more of the, you know, the form-based zoning going back to what people were building in the 50s and 60s. These 1,000-square-foot ranches, story-and-a-half homes, even some garage under stuff. I mean, as home costs go up, you'll see more and more of that. The big problem is not that there's no demand there. The problem is the available lots, especially in Plover, because don't allow for that. It's a 1,500-square-foot ranch minimum.
Yeah.
You cannot build, and that's, I think Denion's putting in a subdivision, I think next year that some of that will change, but I still think there's a huge gap in where the demand is and affordability, what's affordable right now and what the lots call for. So I would even encourage, I don't know if you'll get to it, but I would encourage the city to look at putting in, and we talked about some smaller lot developments and having some preset plans and some stuff like that to really encourage that type of growth.
Yeah. So those are the three conversations that we picked up on from the last meeting around zoning. You know, I honestly think that these are really good objectives and that fit well into this goal generally. So there's no major objections. I'll keep going. As it relates to economic development, the conversation was some type of formal Tif policy, and the realization is that each housing project that the city is faced with requires different amounts of TIF, and it all depends on a number of factors. Is it infill development? Is it got environmental contamination? Is it identifying a need that we want to address in the community? Is it affordable or underdeveloped? But having some type of matrix or standard allows city staff to go into conversations with developers saying, this is really where we want to focus our time, energy, and money, and this is really what you think you should be focusing on. And if you would like TIF assistance, this is what we expect. The City Council a few months ago adopted essentially an electric vehicle charging requirement. If you receive TIF funding, you are required to put in EV charging stations now. And so leveraging that policy and other TIF policies that we can put together with some flexibility goes a long way in addressing, other than us just giving millions of dollars out the door every few months to a new development from an outside developer, right? I wrote consider pay-go incentives with higher rates for larger projects and upfront incentives for smaller neighborhood projects. One thing that we've learned, and you know, Matt and Jeff didn't stick around, but they didn't want a pay-go incentive, which is essentially a property tax relief or property tax subsidy. They needed that upfront incentive to make their project work. And if you have more local developers who are more likely to spend their money, they don't have the financial cash to do a project and just be okay with a long-term pay-go incentive, the upfront cash goes a long way. So that was kind of the conversation that we had last month. Made a lot of sense. And then finally, we've talked a little bit about this, but doing the state of Wisconsin allows us to extend the TIF for one additional year, and all 100% of the increment from that TIF goes into essentially a housing trust fund, which we have established in the city of Stevens Point. But for like TIF number 5, I mean, that's like $1.5 million that could go into the housing trust fund that can be used to address some of these programs that we've talked about. But so all of our recommendations would be, when able, extend the life of TIF 1 year for that affordable housing extension.
When is TIF 5 closing? Is that 28?
27, and then we're hoping to do the extension to 28.
Okay, thanks.
And then ideas, Sheboygan just adopted a TIF policy last summer, and then Oshkosh as well has a TIF policy and an application that comes along with it. And these are ways that actually better protects the community and better protects city staff from situations where you get a developer who gets money and walks away, as an example.
Could some of those pair together with the last slide? So say you have a pre-planned, like, hey, we have a 100 by 150 foot lot. We have a planned development that would fit there. It's already approved. And with some of the funds you have available, we'd have a grant program to go in and demolish, you know, homes that meet a certain threshold, say they're below a certain appraised value, or the repairs to bring them up would exceed a certain amount, where you have some solid criteria where a builder could come in and say, hey, I know I can get because again, bridging that gap between that home's still worth $100,000 in this market, even though it's in really rough shape. Mm-hmm. You know, the city could have some very clear criteria saying, we'll provide a $50,000 grant, which, you know, say that's half the cost of what a $100,000 home is worth, to come in and develop it. That way, it's a little easier for the developer to come in, bite that off, because it's hard to go in and just demolish a $100,000 building and then try to spend $300,000 to put something else up. You know, to say, if you kind of compare those two together, saying, you know, we've got this, if you build this pre-designed thing we have, we'll come in and pay for the, you know, a half of the value of the existing properties. You know, you may pair the last two slides together.
Mm-hmm.
Might be able to close that gap a little, you know, make it a little easier.
Yeah. Travis has his hand raised.
Go ahead, Travis.
Hey guys, I think I've thrown this in on one of the recommendations, but when you're talking about formal TIF policy, do we have anything in place that allows us to kind of reevaluate 3, 5, 10 years down the road whether or not that was a good development? Did everybody live up to their end of things and all that kind of it? To, I guess, a check and balance on the tax and TIF funds that are going out.
City staff.
We don't typically evaluate projects, you know, 3 to 5 years out. What we do essentially within development agreements put specific thresholds, like you have to meet X number of assessed value for the life of the TIF district. And I hate to say it this way, but essentially the city is looking out for its own best interest with that. You know, we want to make sure that if you receive financing from the city, that you meet the minimum assessed value. We don't look at, and I call those, that's like the hard costs. We don't look at the soft costs or the soft components of development, like what is their occupancy ratio, where were the demands, what were the issues. It's just not something that we've done, and if the body would want to make that recommendation, we could definitely add that.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Okay. The conversation that we also had was how do we better define the redevelopment authority and the housing authority's role in housing and housing programs. And with the realization that there's some uncertainty about how the RA and the housing authority fit into economic development, how do they manage programs for housing rehab and assistance? Are there ways that could further goals, objectives of the housing task force? And why is there a years-long wait list for the city-owned housing, and how do we address this? The recommendation would be, again, to better identify the RA and the housing authority's role in housing and housing programs, and explore ways to combine the two authorities into a centralized organization. Up until 2012 or 2013, they were one organization, and under the former mayor, for whatever reason, they were split. But I think there's value in having a conversation about bringing the two back under one community development authority, and further exploring ways that we can address some of the housing needs within Stevens Point. And the idea would be to replicate what the city of Wausau has, and so I put the link to their community development authority within the goal here.
And that sort of addresses what I had talked about, is alignment between council's goals, still having an independent body, but still alignment in those goals. If you look at our strategic plan, there isn't alignment with what RDA and Housing Authority is doing. So I believe, and in my experience, that would be a really good goal.
And are those positions elected, or are those just appointed?
Appointed.
They're all appointed. Because I think that's part of the reason it switched, wasn't it? That somebody wasn't getting their way, so they created one and appointed people to it to get to a certain
familiar,
point?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, so essentially, the redevelopment authority it's all appointed, and I happen to be the director of that board, but I'll have an honest conversation that it's a really good landholding group. We haven't done the best job of getting housing trust funds out the door, and have had some really uncomfortable conversations. I have no issue saying this either. The Rices submitted 2 RFPs to the redevelopment authority, and the redevelopment authority and the city council weren't on the same page. And so, because the RA owned the land, they rejected those proposals. And it was a really frustrating few months trying to work through that whole process. It
was a missed opportunity.
Yeah. And, the housing authority is its own separate entity, that I think there's a lot of, I don't say mystery, but, how are there ways that we could better align the housing authority's goals and objectives with the city council's goals and objectives, and how are ways that we can address that, so. Any questions on this? Okay. The conversation, evaluate existing programs offered and analyze impacts and or needed changes, and of course, market materials better. Yeah, a lot of the existing programs we have are out of reach for a lot of individuals, partially because of their income, which is a really interesting topic. We spend a lot of time focusing on the lower end of that income bracket, but the Alice folks who maybe make $47,000 a year when our cutoff is $44,000 a year need that help as well. And so how do you adjust your programs to better align with even the lower middle class, and allowing those in those specific income brackets the opportunity to utilize programs that we have in the city for the low income folks as well. So Neighbor Helping Neighbor is a really good example. It's a $5,000 grant that the city provides, but you have to meet certain income thresholds. And again, housing is not inexpensive to maintain, and if you're over that income threshold, you don't qualify for the funding. And so can we expand those programs to make it better for a wider income bracket? And this is, a realization that we have in community development, is that we need to better market these materials. Anyone have questions, comments, concerns on this?
Do you guys, with some of those programs, do you need to meet the same criteria that, like as I would as a landlord, where you have to very strictly adhere to criteria that you have to not be violating fair housing laws? Or do you not have to worry about that? Can you look at it more in each application individually and decide, can you make exceptions? Like, hey, our criteria is this, but we can make an exception for this reason? Or do you need to be pretty cut and dry? Like, do you need to, I guess wrong way, do you need to make alterations to your criteria, or can you just alter your approach?
Yeah, really good question. So we had a Neighbor Helping Neighbor grant, and the individual who was applying made $500 more a year than what was allowed. And I had to go through redevelopment authority to get the blessing to approve that grant. And so we are trying to find ways to administratively provide flexibility. But at that point, you might as well look at expanding the program in and of itself. These programs specifically are for owner occupied, but yeah, I mean, is there a way for us to look at, non-owner occupied housing, and are there grants that could be available for something like that?
I wasn't even looking at it from that. I'm just wondering if it would, if you need to up your income threshold on some of those, or if you need to just say, hey, staff has flexibility within a 10% margin where they can just make that, pre-approved that staff can make the call 10% one way or the other.
Yeah. Yeah, a good example is the residential structure demo grant. We've had that for a few years, and we've had zero usage out of that program. And so, identifying ways that we can get that out there or realign those dollars for something else.
Again, a lot of that, excuse me, probably a function of this market where those homes are just worth more.
Yeah.
That you need to subsidize a much larger chunk of the value of that property to get someone to actually demolish it, where it's worth more. And truth, I mean, homes in those, even on the north side, homes are selling 200, 240. What used to be a tear it down house isn't anymore.
Yeah.
The values are there, or the high end is there enough where it's worth going in and remodeling those homes. But if you want to look at density, increasing that threshold of what the city would provide to demolish a building would maybe be necessary.
The next
Hello?
one. Yes.
Ryan, this is Joe from the Stevens Point Housing Authority. I just wanted to go back to your previous go about the two housing authorities. And one thing I wanted to just point out is that even though we both have housing authority in our names, we do slightly different things, because Portage County works primarily with landlords where they issue Section 8 vouchers. So even though it's still affordable housing, is different where the tenants get a voucher and they get to live in a private market. We provide just traditional public housing where people come in, they get on the waiting list. When they're off the waiting list, they move into a unit. So if people were confused, because it has housing authority in both of our names, but we also do provide slightly different services, because we do traditional public housing and Portage County does the vouchers for people to live in a private market.
Very good.
So just wanted to point that out as part of the notes, in case people were wondering why there's two different entities. We don't necessarily do the same exact thing.
Thank you for that clarification.
Yes.
Expansion of programs like Rent Ready and increasing transitional housing stock. This addresses the high-risk tenants. The realizations that Four Seasons, Point Motel, Blue Top Motel are not sustainable transitional housing for those in and out of homelessness or in transition. Are there ways to expand the Rent Ready program to include the IDD community? That was one thing that Mark has talked about quite a bit. So create a housing loan program to nonprofit partner organizations seeking to expand transitional or IDD housing within the community. This is where the city would essentially be the financing institution and would have a minimal interest, paid over 30 years like a traditional mortgage, something that you typically wouldn't be able to receive or have a hard time receiving traditional financing for a project like that. Again, and this is borrowed from our friends at City of Wausau. I was going to say stolen from, but no, I said borrowed from instead. So, and those are programs that are run through their Community Development Authority.
There's another population that fits into this process, working with I don't know what we call ourselves, the task force or the team of people working with refugees. This just came up yesterday in one of our conversations with one of the teams, is this transitional housing, and also just having to possibly, I'm actually going to talk to Mark Cordes about possibly expanding Rent Ready to include that population, because they are often seen as a rent risk, and to have that kind of partnership and collaboration going on so that they can get into housing, because that's a struggle right now with, as we bring refugee families in, is finding appropriate housing that can be funded for it.
Great idea. Well, and Rent Ready also provides that extra, just that little bit of extra
That net.
underpinning.
Yeah,
that
it
net.
provides
Yep.
the net so
Yep.
that the trust can happen, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
But these loans and like these nonprofit partner organizations for that type of housing would go a long way. And if the city can be the financing institution, so it's a real way to leverage public funds for the public good.
Is that something that would fall under council? Or would that be under redevelopment? You're thinking like a
I
housing
think there's
trust
some
fund?
opportunity to look at council being the caretaker of that fund.
Can I ask you a question, Ryan? So like, let's say, let's dream that One Big Tent wants to create transitional housing for our neighbors who are homeless and who might be even chronically homeless, right? But it's still in a sense transitional housing, because
They're in transition.
yeah.
Yeah.
So would this fall under that then?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And this could be a real tool, where, you have a qualified nonprofit saying, this is something that we would like to pursue, this is something we would want to do, and it takes the financial barrier out of the conversation, because the city would be able to leverage and essentially be like we do for, some of the loans that we have for down payment assistance, where we take a position on a loan, and in this case, we'd have the primary position, but, and then manage that program and work with the individuals to ensure that the loan's getting paid back, but you're also providing that housing for those in the community that need it.
Would that program include inspection criteria? I'm just thinking those are the people who are often not going to report an issue because they don't want to be moved out, that something like that may provide a good instrument for the city to require some sort of inspection program with the loan program.
Yeah, if we're the primary financing
Right.
group, and even if you'd have the note, and then you've got the development agreement, you'd have in the development agreement the requirements for, let's say, annual inspections,
So there are a few communities that are NeighborWorks communities or have NeighborWorks organizations. Green Bay has one, Madison has one, I think there's one in southwestern Wisconsin, where they have a nonprofit that's specifically designated as the Community Housing Development Organization for the community. I'm not sure if Stevens Point qualifies for some of the loan programs or grant programs that fund those projects, but it's just something to consider. That might not need to be a city-run institution, but there might be room for organizations that already exist in the community to create this together.
Yeah, perfect, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And then changing from the economic development piece to the community engagement piece, just having better neighborhood outreach and conversation when new housing is proposed. We follow the minimum state statutory requirements to publish and notify for public hearings when new housing developments are proposed. But as I mentioned, and as you can literally watch on our closed captioning or whatever it is television channel in the city, or listen to our meetings on our public radio station, that public hearings and public meetings are not conducive towards actual discussion and input on how developments may impact the neighborhood in which they're proposed. So the recommendation from this body would be to either codify an ordinance or set standards for additional outreach meetings as part of housing changes that are happening within the neighborhood that are not necessarily considered as part of the public hearing. And I did make a note this would not exclude the minimum state mandated requirements for public hearings. And just had some ideas, you know, the Boise, Idaho's got they require that a developer actually hold a neighborhood meeting and take public input, and their staff is there to, you know, ensure that best practices are being implemented at neighborhood meetings. And then a really interesting article from governing.com, which is a real website about, you know, local government nerds like myself, where NIMBYism and neighborhoods are oftentimes the largest barrier to addressing housing changes and housing reform that's needed within all communities. So,
Question, Ryan, and maybe something like that, the outreach and using neighborhoods, that's aligned with, back to the strategic plan. I'm gonna go over and over and over on that because it's approved. It's our planning document for the future. It's all about neighborhoods because that's where the rubber hits the road, right? And so this could be well aligned with that, creating those neighborhood hubs, creating those people within the neighborhoods who are already sharing all kinds of information, but linking those together.
yeah.
Yep.
So that's the end of the goal number one, but with all of the objectives and recommendations included. If there's any changes that you'd like to see, you can shoot me an email or discuss it now, whichever you feel most comfortable with. Again, the goal number two, which is the concept of essentially, you know, increasing home ownership opportunities through social equity, is really, really fun to research. Seriously, like everything that's out there. And I got so geeked out. I was like, okay, we're way too ahead of myself to bring this to this group right now.
Are you going down rabbit holes?
Yeah, exactly.
48 tabs.
Yeah, 48 tabs, like 3 screens going. Yeah. So I think we'll actually have something for the next meeting, but I want us to really solidify the first goal, and I think that we've achieved what we're set out to do in that first goal. And so I'm looking forward to putting this in some type of report format.
And I wasn't at the last meeting. The goals that we're establishing here, is this going to be our recommendations then to council? My only question being where, you know, we've talked considerably about getting rid of the 2 unrelated and making some changes there. Where in these would that fall? I just want to make sure that doesn't get overlooked.
Ironically, the definition of family will fall within goal 1 and goal 2. I'll just throw this one out there since you asked. The definition of family continues to be a major player here. Like, changes in home ownership and needing to have roommates to better afford the home that you're in is like a real thing. And so renting out a room or two is like not allowed within our current code because of the 2 unrelated. And so identifying that ways to increase home ownership is to allow for roommates in a home that you own is something that like is one of the ways to achieve that goal. So yeah, I think next month we'll really start duking out the definition of family, and then taking a look at goal number 2 as part of this. But more or less taking goal number 1 and saying this is done.
Yep.
And moving on to goal 2 to keep the progress moving forward by our deadline. So.
The 2 things I would add, I've mentioned it a couple times today, but if you want to, I don't know where they would fit in goal 1, but the 2 things we talked about, I know the city's push, like for commercial, we have build-ready sites. I think build-ready plans, as we discussed, for both residential and multifamily, and even if we have a planned development for a 6 individual homes or a 10-unit building, I think having a wide variety of build-ready plans on specific, look at our current lots. Say, okay, we have, 2 lots on the north side. If you have a house and a vacant lot, what could we put there? What would be the best use of, and having build-ready plans, I think would be a really great tool. And again, pairing that with maybe the grant program and coming up with some terminology of exactly what thresholds would need to be met to say, okay, this house is worth, and maybe don't have a specific, maybe we don't provide a specific dollar amount. Maybe we'll pay 50% of the assessed value of a property to tear it down if it meets certain criteria. And not having an actual dollar amount to it because that could limit it, but saying, okay, if we have a $30,000 house or a $50,000 or $100,000 house, what does it take and maybe it's a percentage of what the new assessed value would be, looking at that and saying, just coming up with some set criteria for that program also, I would add in there somewhere.
Yeah. I think one of the separate goals is going to be essentially addressing the deteriorating housing stock and what do you do within that. And realistically, as much as we like to have, each goal in its own little silo, that's just not how it all works, right? I mean, there's going to be spillover from the different goals and the objectives that we're trying to achieve. So, the programs that we talk about in goal number 1 are going to spill over into the second and third goal in some form and fashion. And it's just, putting it all in one document and then collectively saying, this is what's important to us is probably the most important piece of this.
Yeah. Well, and I kind of look at, we own enough property, I can say, okay, what would entice me to do, and we've got, and I don't even know where, I was gonna ask you too, we own 2 duplexes on Whiting Ave, they are on a half-acre lot. There's more than enough room to put a 4-unit in the back, but I don't meet the lot size requirements to do that. Yeah. Looking at stuff like that, or we've got a house not far from the yard or the Fourth Homes, where we've got a house and a vacant lot next to it. I would love to demolish that and put up a 4-unit or put up a planned development of some sort, but the barriers, I can't tear down a $100,000 house. I can't afford to do it. So looking at real examples in town of what are the hurdles that we're facing on some of those properties and trying to look at how, and not to benefit myself, but just multiple people are going to be at the same barriers.
Yeah.
That
Well,
we do to break
one of the
this down.
barriers that within our residential structure grant is you have to build a new single-family house within 12 months. And if the purpose is to, your property near 4th Avenue's townhomes is to tear it down and build higher quality and higher density, maybe that's a way we change that program and say, okay, here's money to tear that down, and we will recover our costs by providing the grant through property tax.
Yeah. Well, I just look at that. I mean, if you have 6 condo-style homes on essentially 2 city lots, you're $1 million, $1.2 million. I mean, realistically, the taxes on that would far outweigh, even over a short term, the amount of money the city would front to tear down that $100,000 house on that lot.
I think captured within this too is something you and I've talked about, Ryan, is the tax deed properties. The county is the first,
Yep.
and they've been a barrier to us actually getting those locations. And so I think that needs, and it's all kind of built in, but it's a related topic, and getting the county to figure that one out.
Yeah.
That's all I've got.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for coming,
Absolutely.
participating.
That's awesome stuff.
A video of this meeting is available for viewing on the city's website, stevenspoint.com/videos.